The scream hit before I even took my second sip of coffee, sharp enough to make my hand freeze halfway to my mouth. Then came the roar of pressurized water, loud and violent, like somebody had cracked open a fire hydrant in the middle of the block. By the time I reached the back porch, my next-door neighbor, Denise Holloway, was standing in the center of her prize-winning garden soaked from head to toe in bright purple water, staring at the sky like God had personally declared war on her landscaping. A fountain nearly 20 feet high was blasting out of the flower bed beside her patio, spraying her white vinyl fence, her wicker furniture, her rose bushes, and a terrified little Bichon named Winston, who had gone from snow white to grape-flavored in less than 10 seconds. Denise was screaming about vandals and chemical attacks while gripping a green hose that disappeared beneath the fence and ended at the outdoor faucet attached to my house. I stood there in sweatpants, holding my coffee, watching purple mist drift through the morning sunlight, and I remember thinking, there are moments in life when you know you should act like a responsible adult, but every cell in your body is begging you to laugh. I did not laugh, at least not out loud, because Denise looked like she might climb the fence and beat me to death with a garden trowel, but I did raise my phone and start recording. She saw me and pointed with both hands, water dripping from her hair and chin. "You did this," she yelled. I looked at the hose, then at her, then back at the hose. "Denise," I said, "that line is connected to my faucet." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out for a second, and that silence was probably the first honest thing she had given me in 3 weeks. To understand how we got there, you have to understand two things about our street. The first was that Briar Glen looked peaceful from the outside. Rows of maple trees, neat little lawns, flags by the porches, people waving while they pretended not to know each other's business. And the second was that Denise Holloway believed peace only existed when everyone followed rules she invented. She was not the president of an HOA, because we did not have an HOA. That had never stopped her from acting like one. She ran something called the Briar Glen Improvement Circle, which was really 5 neighbors, a group chat, and Denise with a clipboard. She measured grass, complained about garbage cans, left notes about porch furniture, and once asked an elderly widower to repaint his mailbox because the blue was too emotionally aggressive. I'd lived beside her for 6 years, and for most of that time I handled her the way people handle a car alarm in the distance. Annoying but not worth walking toward. My name is Cole Mercer. I was 44 then, divorced, working from home as a claims investigator, and trying to rebuild a life that had gotten quieter than I expected. I liked my mornings. I liked my tomatoes. And I liked knowing the only person responsible for my water bill was me. The trouble started on a Tuesday before sunrise when I went outside to water the garden, and the pressure dropped so suddenly the hose coughed in my hands. At first I assumed the city was flushing a line, but then I heard a steady hiss near the fence, low and constant, almost hidden under the sound of sprinklers. I followed it past the shed and found a second hose running beneath a loose fence panel. It was connected to my faucet with a plastic splitter, wrapped in duct tape, and covered with an old dish towel as if fabric made theft invisible. I stared at it for a long moment, partly because the nerve of it was impressive. Whoever had done this had not borrowed water for an emergency. They had built infrastructure. I pulled gently, thinking maybe there was some strange explanation, but the hose resisted, so I gave it a hard yank. The connector popped loose and sprayed me directly in the chest. And through the narrow gap under the fence I saw 2 hands in red floral gardening gloves jerk backward. Denise owned 3 pairs of those gloves. She wore them like a uniform. I went around to her front yard, still dripping, and there she was, trimming a rose bush that did not need trimming, wearing sunglasses even though the sun had barely cleared the rooftops. I held up the wet connector. "Want to tell me why your hose was attached to my house?" She did not blink. "Oh, that," she said. "I thought it was mine. Your faucet is on the other side of the fence. Property layouts can be confusing." "No, they cannot," I said. "Not when the hose is threaded under the fence and taped to my pipe." She sighed like I was wasting her morning. "Cole, you've always been territorial." That word stayed with me because it was such a clean little trick, turning my ownership of my own property into a personality flaw. I told her not to touch the faucet again, and she smiled the way people smile when they have already decided your boundary is temporary. I walked away angry, but not yet alarmed. I still believed embarrassment might correct her. By Friday, my water pressure dipped every afternoon. and my usage app showed nearly 400 extra gallons. I checked the fence and found a brand new brass splitter installed where the plastic one had been. Her sprinklers were running while our car was gone, soaking a lawn so green it looked digitally enhanced. I photographed everything, disconnected the hose, and sent her a text with the pictures. Her reply came 30 seconds later. "Stop photographing my yard." I called her and said, "I am photographing my faucet." She raised her voice immediately, accusing me of harassment, spying, and creating a hostile neighborhood environment. Then she delivered the line that changed my attitude completely. "People like you move in," she said, "and think you could ignore community standards." I'd lived there longer than she had, but facts had never been Denise's favorite neighborhood feature. The next morning, I found a typed notice in my mailbox, printed on paper with the Improvement Circle logo, warning that aggressive conduct could result in community action. At the bottom, she had signed her name as chairperson. I took the notice inside, set it beside my coffee maker, and laughed until I realized she had entered my property to place it there. That afternoon, I bought a weatherproof lock for the faucet, installed it, tested it twice, and went to bed feeling foolishly optimistic. 2 mornings later, the lock was lying in the grass, crushed and bent, with small hammer marks along the side. The brass splitter was back, tighter than before, and the hose had been buried under mulch to hide it. I stood there, holding that broken lock, and something in me settled. Not exploded, settled. Anger is noisy at first, but real determination is quiet. I did not bang on her door. I did not call the police. And I did not post anything online. I took pictures, saved the water records, ordered 2 motion cameras, and started reading late at night about water tracing dyes used for ponds, fountains, and leak detection. I found one that was non-toxic, biodegradable, safe for grass, pets, and plumbing, but impossible to ignore once it entered a line. It came in a deep violet concentrate that could turn a swimming pool into something from another planet. I rigged a small sealed reservoir behind my planter box with a valve feeding only the outdoor faucet, tested it with a bucket, and washed everything down afterward. The next morning at 4:47, one of the cameras sent an alert. There was Denise, crouched beside my wall in a bathrobe and sneakers, working by flashlight. She cut the replacement lock, attached her splitter, tucked the hose beneath the fence, and patted the mulch smooth with both hands. She looked calm, practiced, almost proud. Watching that video, I felt the last piece of doubt leave me. This was not confusion, and it was not about saving money. Denise needed to prove she could take something from me and make me accept it. So I put on a fresh pot of coffee, opened the valve, positioned my phone toward her garden, and waited for the Queen of Briar Glen to water her roses. Edit. About an hour later, I heard the metal squeak of Denise's hose reel turning, then the soft click of the nozzle, followed by that confident little hum she always made when she was doing something she believed nobody could stop. The line hissed, pressure built, and then the whole garden erupted. Violet water shot straight through the sprinkler head and rose above her roses in a twisting column, catching the sunlight like purple glass. Denise screamed so loud that Winston started barking in circles, which only made things worse because the sprinkler swept across him and turned half his coat lavender before he could escape beneath a patio chair. Denise tried to grab the hose, slipped in the wet grass, landed on one knee, then stood up with her robe clinging to her like a soaked curtain. Her white fence was striped purple. The stone path looked like somebody had spilled grape soda across it, and every time she squeezed the nozzle, another bright stream sprayed directly back at her. She finally looked toward my porch and saw me standing there with my coffee in one hand and my phone in the other. "You poisoned my yard," she shouted. I kept my voice calm. "That product is safe for ponds, plants, animals, and plumbing." "Then why is it in my water?" I pointed at the hose disappearing under the fence. "That is a very interesting question." Her face changed as she followed my finger. For a second, I saw the exact moment she remembered that the evidence was still attached to her hand. She dropped the nozzle like it had bitten her. "You set a trap." "On my own faucet," I said. "You cannot trap someone unless they go somewhere they are not supposed to be." Curtains shifted up and down the street. Mr. Alvarez from across the road stepped onto his porch holding a newspaper he had not opened, and Tessa Langley, who lived 2 houses over, raised her phone above her hedge. Denise stormed toward the fence, leaving violet footprints on the patio. "Shut it off right now. Disconnect your hose. This is vandalism. Taking hundreds of gallons of water and smashing my lock is theft. You have no proof I smashed anything. I turned my phone around and showed her a frozen image from the camera. Denise in her bathrobe, bolt cutters in one hand, flashlight in the other. Her jaw tightened. She looked less embarrassed than betrayed, as though the camera had violated some private agreement between us where she was allowed to lie, and I was required to pretend. You will regret humiliating me, she said. Then she marched back toward her house, Winston following behind her like a tiny purple witness. I should have felt triumphant, and for about 5 minutes I did. There is a clean satisfaction in watching a lie become visible, especially when it stains a white fence. But as the laughter from the neighbors faded and the street settled down, I felt something colder underneath it. Denise had not looked defeated. She had looked challenged. The next morning, a plastic bag filled with purple grass clippings was sitting on my porch. A handwritten note was taped to it. Siege chemical contamination has been reported. The capital letters were pressed so hard the pen had torn the paper in 2 places. At 10:30, Officer Grant Willis knocked on my door. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with the exhausted eyes of someone who had already heard Denise's version 3 different ways. He looked at the unopened bottle of dye, read the label, checked the product information on his phone, then glanced toward the purple streaks on her fence. She told dispatch you released hazardous material into the neighborhood water supply. You said it only fed the exterior faucet, and it only reached her yard because her hose was attached to it. He rubbed his forehead. Do you have video? I showed him the footage of her cutting the lock and connecting the line. He watched it twice, then looked at me. Keep this, keep everything. Is she being charged? Not today. Right now she is claiming she believed the faucet was shared property. It is bolted to my house. I know. He sighed and closed his notebook. Just do not escalate it. I almost laughed at that word. Denise had stolen my water, destroyed my lock, filed a false hazardous material complaint, and somehow I was being warned not to escalate. Officer Willis must have seen the frustration on my face because he added, I am not saying you are wrong, Mr. Mercer. I am saying people like this sometimes care more about winning than consequences. He left, and that sentence followed me for the rest of the day. Over the next week, Denise turned pettiness into a full-time occupation. She adjusted her sprinklers so they sprayed over the fence and soaked my driveway every morning. She parked her SUV inches from my mailbox. She filed complaints with the city about my shed, my compost bin, and a dead branch that was not even on my property. She posted in the Briar Glen group chat that certain residents had become unstable and dangerous, though she never used my name because even Denise understood the basic outline of a defamation lawsuit. I refused to react publicly. I waved when I saw her. I spoke kindly to her husband, Leonard, who looked like a man serving a long sentence for a crime he could not remember committing. I even complimented Winston's haircut, though the groomer had not managed to remove every purple streak from his ears. My calm seemed to bother Denise more than anger would have. She needed me to become the villain she had described. And every normal conversation I had with another neighbor weakened her story. Then, at 2:17 one morning, my phone chimed. The motion camera showed her beside my faucet again. She wore dark sweatpants, a hooded jacket, and yellow rubber gloves. She had replaced the brass splitter with a more expensive metal valve and was trying to route the hose deeper beneath the fence. I watched from behind the kitchen curtain as she worked. Part of me wanted to step outside and confront her under the security light, but Officer Willis's warning stayed with me. People like this care more about winning than consequences. So I filmed. I documented. I let her finish. The next day, I called a plumber named Ray Dalton, an old friend of my brother who had the calm voice and suspicious eyebrows of a man who had seen every bad decision a homeowner could make with a wrench. He inspected the connection and said Denise's valve could create back pressure if she kept opening and closing the line while her sprinkler system was running. It was not likely to destroy anything, but it could strain the outdoor pipe and cause a leak inside the wall. That changed the equation for me. Until then, the fight had mostly been about money, boundaries, and humiliation. Now her obsession could damage my house. Ray installed a pressure regulator with a remote timer and a shutoff valve behind the shrubs. The idea was simple. If Denise connected again, I could increase the outdoor pressure briefly, not beyond safe limits, just enough to expose where the water was going and force the unauthorized fittings to reveal themselves. I told myself it was documentation, not revenge, but I would be lying if I said I did not know exactly when I wanted to use it. Every Saturday afternoon, Denise hosted what she called a garden society gathering. 5 women arrived in pastel dresses and white hats, carrying lemon cakes, tiny sandwiches, and enough judgment to poison a reservoir. They sat beneath a white canopy, drank tea from porcelain cups, and discussed neighborhood standards as if planning national policy. That Saturday, Denise had clearly designed the whole event as a public comeback. The purple stains were mostly gone, fresh flowers covered the damaged patch of lawn, and a new white tablecloth fluttered beneath a handwritten sign welcoming guests to an afternoon of community grace. I watched from my kitchen while she smiled too widely and told the women that difficult times reveal the person's true character. Then she picked up the hose connected to my faucet, walked toward the hydrangeas, and turned the nozzle. I pressed the timer. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the line jumped. A thick burst of water exploded from the nozzle, knocking Denise's arm upward and sending a hard spray across the entire table. Cups flipped, lemon cake collapsed, hats flew into the flower beds, and one woman jumped backwards so fast her chair folded beneath her. Denise spun around, lost control of the nozzle, and sprayed Leonard through the open patio door. He stood there holding a tray of sandwiches, water running down his face, and shouted the most honest words anyone had spoken in weeks. "Denise, stop stealing that man's water." The garden went silent except for the spinning sprinkler and Winston barking beneath the table. Officer Willis arrived 20 minutes later. Denise met him in the driveway wrapped in a towel, insisting I had attacked her guest with a pressure weapon. He walked to the side yard, followed the hose under the fence, and looked at the metal valve attached to my faucet. Then he looked at her. "Is this your hose?" She crossed her arms. "That is not the issue." "It is exactly the issue," he said. I showed him the overnight video and Ray's written inspection. Officer Willis closed his notebook without making a single mark. "Mrs. Rippeek, in 1 Holloway, remove your equipment from Mr. Mercer's property today. If you touch that faucet again, this stops being a neighborhood complaint." Denise stared at him, face pale beneath the remains of her makeup. For the first time, someone in authority had spoken to her the way she spoke to everyone else, directly, without negotiation. She removed the hose before sunset, and I went to bed thinking maybe the wart finally run out of water. At 6 the next morning, I stepped outside and found the faucet handle missing, the pipe capped with tape, and a thin stream running down the foundation into the soil beneath my house. I stood there in the pale morning light watching that thin stream disappear into the soil, and something inside me changed. Up to that point, the whole thing had still carried a ridiculous edge. Purple dogs, flying tea cakes, Leonard getting sprayed through his own doorway. The kind of story people laugh about at backyard cookouts years later. The water running against a foundation is not funny. A damaged line inside the wall can mean mold, rot, thousands of dollars, and months of repairs, all because one woman could not accept the word no. I took pictures before touching anything. Close shots, wide shots, timestamps, the broken fitting, the drag marks in the mulch. Then I called the city water department and Officer Willis. The technician arrived first, a quiet man named Samuel Price who had spent 27 years repairing lines and looked offended on behalf of every pipe ever installed. He crouched beside the wall, examined the cap and shook his head. "Somebody did this deliberately," he said. "They used a wrench, twisted the handle assembly off, then tried to close the line without shutting the main valve. Could this damage the house? It already soaked the soil beside your foundation. You caught it early, but another few hours might have been expensive." He repaired the faucet, installed the tamper-resistant cover, and attached a bright orange municipal tag stating that further interference could result in criminal charges. Officer Willis arrived while Samuel was finishing. He watched the security footage from the night before, but Denise had approached through the narrow blind spot between my shed and the lilac bushes. The camera caught a shadow, a flashlight, and the edge of a yellow glove, not enough to identify a face beyond doubt. Willis looked across the fence toward Denise's kitchen window, where one curtain shifted and went still. "We both saw it. I know what this looks like," he said. "But looking guilty is not the same as evidence. Then what am I supposed to do? Wait until she floods my basement?" "No," he said, lowering his voice. "You stop playing neighborhood games and build a case she cannot talk her way out of. That was the first time anyone had said exactly what I needed to hear. I had been trying to beat Denise at humiliation, and humiliation was her natural habitat. She could turn embarrassment into outrage, outrage into victimhood, and victimhood into another excuse to attack. I needed something colder than anger and stronger than comedy. I needed paperwork. That afternoon, Ray Dalton returned with a surveyor he trusted named Malcolm Avery, a lean 60-year-old with sunburned forearms and the patient expression of a man who had spent half his life explaining property lines to people who preferred imagination. Malcolm unfolded maps across my kitchen table, compared the original subdivision plat with city utility records, then walked a narrow drainage strip between our yards. What he found surprised both of us. The strip where Denise had buried her hose crossed a municipal drainage and maintenance easement established when Briar Glen was built. Neither Denise nor I owned exclusive control over it. More importantly, an abandoned irrigation branch beneath her flower bed had once supplied a vacant model home 2 streets over, and someone had reconnected it to my exterior line using unpermitted fittings. Malcolm tapped the map with one finger. "This is not just somebody borrowing from a hose bib," he said. "Somebody altered a utility path and concealed it under the easement. That can affect drainage, backflow, and neighboring service lines. Do you think she knew?" He gave me a look. People do not bury brass connectors and cover them with mulch by accident. For the next 4 days, I stopped reacting and started documenting. Ray placed small flow markers inside the drainage channel. Malcolm marked the legal easement with discrete survey flags. Samuel filed an official inquiry with Public Works about an unauthorized irrigation connection. I added 2 cameras, both aimed only at my property and the shared easement. And then I waited. Denise, meanwhile, announced a community civility brunch for Saturday morning. The invitation appeared in every mailbox except mine. It promised pastries, conflict healing, and a discussion about protecting neighborhood harmony from disruptive behavior. I almost admired the nerve. She was preparing to hold court while city workers were preparing to inspect the ground beneath her roses. Saturday arrived bright and warm. By 9, half the block was gathered beneath her canopy. Denise stood near the patio in a cream dress and pearl necklace, greeting people with the wounded dignity of a fallen politician. I remained on my porch with coffee. Not hiding, not performing, just watching. At 9:20, a Public Works truck turned onto the street. Then another. 3 workers stepped out carrying cones, maps, probes, and a portable flow meter. The conversations in Denise's yard faded one by one. She hurried toward them, smile fixed in place. "Can I help you?" Rhea responding to a reported unauthorized connection within the municipal easement. The supervisor said, "This is private property. Part of this corridor is a city right of access. There must be some mistake." He unfolded the map on the hood of the truck. "No mistake, ma'am." The workers followed the survey flags, lifted a section of sod, and exposed the buried irrigation branch. The shiny brass connector Denise had installed at 2 in the morning sat there in full daylight, attached to a line leading directly beneath her garden. One worker opened a test valve near my house. The flow markers moved instantly toward her yard. Another checked the meter, then looked at the supervisor. Confirmed. Unauthorized draw from the Mercer service line. A murmur traveled to the brunch crowd. Tessa Langley raised her phone. Mr. Alvarez crossed his arms and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So that is why his bill went up." Denise rushed forward. "He planted that. He has been obsessed with me for weeks." The supervisor did not argue. He simply held up a sealed evidence bag containing the connector and pointed to the serial number on the city report Samuel had filed. This fitting was photographed in place before excavation. We also have flow records and the service history. Denise looked around for support, but people who had listened to her speeches were now staring at the open trench in her garden. Leonard stepped out of the house, saw the exposed line, and closed his eyes. "Denise," he said quietly, "tell me you did not do this." She turned on him with a fury so sudden the crowd stepped back. "Do not embarrass me in front of these people." Leonard gave a tired laugh. "I think that part already happened. Public Works issued violations for utility tampering, unpermitted irrigation, and interference with a drainage easement. Officer Willis arrived before they finished, not with the exhausted patience he had shown before, but with a formal report number and a warning that any further contact with my water system could result in arrest." Denise did not scream this time. She stood beside the ruined edge of her flower bed, shoulders rigid, watching her imaginary kingdom collapse under orange cones and municipal paperwork. I expected satisfaction to hit me like fireworks. Instead, I felt tired. Not sorry for her exactly, but tired of how much space she had occupied in my mind. Over the next 2 days, she distributed flyers calling me a vandal, hired an attorney to send a threatening letter, and posted a tearful video claiming she had been targeted by a hostile neighbor. I responded once, in the community group, with the city report, the water records, the survey, and a still image of her cutting my lock at 4:47 in the morning. No insults, no jokes, just facts. The comments went silent. A local mediation service contacted us after someone smashed the glass on the neighborhood notice board and left a note saying both of us had destroyed the peace. That was when I agreed to meet. Because Winnie had started to feel too much like living inside the fight. We sat across from each other in a church basement beneath humming fluorescent lights. 2 paper cups of terrible coffee between us. Denise spoke first, calling me vindictive, cruel, and obsessed with humiliating her. I let her finish. Then I slid my folder toward the mediator. Photos, timestamps, repair invoices, city findings, camera footage, and the signed statement from Samuel Price. The mediator read in silence. Denise stared at the table. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost its theatrical edge. I only wanted to keep my garden alive during the watering restrictions. She said, "You could have asked," I replied. She looked up. "You would have said no." That was the whole truth right there. She had not stolen because she lacked water. She had stolen because she could not tolerate my right to refuse. The final agreement required her to reimburse the excess water charges and repair costs, remove every unauthorized connection, submit her irrigation system for inspection, stay off my property, and perform community cleanup hours along the drainage corridor. She also apologized. It was stiff and bitter, but it existed. Weeks later, I sat on my porch with coffee while Winston trotted through her yard, his coat finally white again. The street was quiet. The pressure in my faucet was normal, and for the first time in months, I was not listening for footsteps near the fence. I learned something from that whole mess. Boundaries are not rude, calm is not weakness, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to win a person's respect and start collecting evidence they cannot escape. Still, I know some people will say the purple dye and the Tea Party pressure blast were too petty, and maybe they were. So tell me what you would have done. Did Denise get exactly what she earned? Or did I cross the line when I turned her theft into a public spectacle? Drop your verdict in the comments. Share your worst neighbor story. And hit like if you believe community peace should never require one person to surrender their property, their dignity, or their water bill.